Hello and welcome to Free to Play. My name is Briella, and in this video I'm going to teach you the basics of sewing. So I'm going to show you my sewing machines. I have a Brother XL5130 and I also have a FAF, my industrial machine. I'll teach you how to thread your top stitch on a basic Brother machine, as well as thread your bobbin, load your bobbin, tell you what your bobbin is, teach you how to do a stitch, so a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch, as well as use those stitches in a seam. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and just make a standard easy pattern using recycled Whole Foods bags and make a pillowcase pattern. So this video is great if you're just wanting to maybe start creating but are feeling very intimidated by your sewing machine. I know I did when I first started. So this video will be great to just give you some confidence to start creating on your machine, giving you the basic knowledge that you need. Not an overwhelming amount of knowledge, but just the basics. And then the pillowcase pattern is so simple. It's literally just 2 seams and a hem. So I'll also teach you how to hem very simply. And yeah, again, just giving you the confidence to start creating things. The pillowcase pattern, if you mess it up, you'll probably still get a functional pillowcase out of it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know in the comments if you followed along. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you like my videos so far, and I hope you enjoy. Let's get started. These are the 2 sewing machines that I use. So the one on the right is the FAF. It was given to me. It's an industrial machine. It actually is the whole table. It has a motor underneath, and the motor's just on the right side of the machine. So that is an industrial machine. The one on the left is a Brother XL5130, and it was gifted to me by my mother. It was her machine, so it's an older machine. It doesn't have any electronic screen or anything like that. So both of them were gifted, which is actually pretty cool. Just the universe showing me that I guess I need to be sewing. I'm gonna walk you through just the basics, sewing 101, just what the top stitch is, the top thread. I'll walk through what a bobbin is, the bobbin casing, how to thread the bobbin. So just kind of literally just how to work a machine. So let's go ahead and start learning about sewing machines. I'm going to show you all of the mechanisms for the sewing machine on this Brother machine because it is going to be a little bit closer to what you might have. The industrial machine is a little bit different. So we have up here, this is where you put the top thread. So I'll show you these closer up as well, but this is the top thread up here. It sews through here, down through here, and then in here you have the needle, and down in here you have the bobbin and bobbin casing. Over here, this is how you backstitch, so you just pull that down while you're pressing on your foot pedal, and it'll go ahead and do a backstitch, and we'll talk about that in our stitch section. Up here is where you change the length and the width, and this is this is the length and the width, and then this is how you select on this specific machine your stitches, and we're just going to go over straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. So here it would be 2 and 3, so 2 or 3. And then, yeah, and then up here is where you adjust your tension on this machine, so your tension of your thread. So now I'm going to go over and I'm going to walk you through how to thread this machine, and then we will go ahead and wind a bobbin full, and that's what we'll do. So this is the top of my Brother machine. I'm showing you this because usually newer machines will have these diagrams on the top. So this one on the right is how to thread your bobbin, and I'll show you that in a second. And this is numbers on how to thread the machine. So you could see the little parts right here of the machine. So let's go ahead and walk you through how to thread it. So you're going to take your thread and put it just on this thread spool. This one is for the bobbin right here. So then you go like this, and if you follow the numbers, then it is going underneath that and through. So that's what you do, 1 to 2, and then you'll go ahead and drop it down, and you'll follow the numbers around. So you could see the 4 right there, and you see the 3 right there. So then we'll just go ahead and thread it down and back up, and then in there, let's see if I can go ahead and show you it. So in here is a little metal thing, and you just hook it around the back. That's really important for all the machines because that's going to go ahead and hook it onto
your needle, like to move it up and down. That's how it bobs up and down. So you'll hook it down and then through this little thread loop. There's a little hook right here. There's a hook that you thread it through, and then it just goes through the needle from there. So that's it. So 5 steps, how to thread your needle, and usually the machines will have a diagram. If not, the user manual will have it, but it's pretty simple on these machines to thread it. I didn't really run into a huge problem learning that step. Next, I'll go ahead and show you how to wind the bobbin, and then just how to put it in that case, and then how to lift your bobbin thread up using the top thread. Alright, so here we're going to thread the bobbin. I did not have an empty bobbin casing, so we're just going to use one that's already threaded. So in your bobbin, you can get plastic or metal ones, or plastic ones are like more for this machine. My industrial machine only takes metal ones, and they look like this, and they're a little bit bigger, so I don't know. This Brother machine fits just like the regular generic plastic bobbins. So there's a hole on the top and a hole on the bottom of the bobbin. You're just gonna go ahead and put it on your bobbin loading thing. On this machine, you'll have to unthread the top thread in order to thread your bobbin, so you would probably want to thread your bobbin first. So maybe in steps I'll add that, thread your bobbin first. The numbers on the top read 1 around. So first it's telling me to go around and then back, and there's this little ball thing, this little circle thing right here. You're just going to put the thread through and then go back towards the bobbin. I'm going to go ahead and snip off some of my extra thread, and what you can do is just go ahead and feed this thread up through that open circle. Whoops. Sometimes thread is tricky. So you're just going to put the thread through that circle and place your case on the machine. Go ahead and hold on to that string, click it into the side, hold on to that top string, and then you'll cut it off. Press on your foot pedal. To take it off, you just undo it. Once you're done, you just cut that, and then you will go ahead and load your bobbin next. You're going to have your bobbin case right here, and you're going to go ahead and load this bobbin in so it spins clockwise. There's a little slit on the top of your bobbin case that the thread just kind of pulls through and through the top. Your bobbin case should have a little flap, and if it doesn't, then I don't know. And there is a perfect little top bit that you just open the flap, and closing the flap secures it closed. So it's not gonna pull out, and then to get it out, you just open that little flap and it pulls out. To close it, you have to fit the top little bit in the space and close it. So now you have this bobbin thread down here, and I have my top thread threaded. You're going to use the knob on the right of the sewing machine and always turn towards you to pull the needle down, and then when it comes back up, lift the top thread up into the left, and you'll have your bobbin thread as well. Your foot has a little indent in it. You're going to want to pull the top thread through that indent and towards the back of your machine when you sew, so the top thread doesn't get like jumbled up into the stitch. And that's how you thread your machine. So again, this is the bobbin casing. You're going to want to clean this out often. And your manual will show you how to get this whole area out, but you just get one of these brushes and you just go ahead and clean this area out, because a lot of lint and stuff will come up here. You can look up how to clean and take apart your specific machine. YouTube videos will have it, but you can see how much lint. I didn't clean this one before I stopped using it. It comes out of that. And then even more would come out if this was out. And you could take all of this apart and give it a really good clean, but it's important to regularly clean your bobbin case and oil it as well. And again, your machine's manual will have instructions on how to do that for your specific machine. So that
is all about your machine, your bobbin, your top thread. Now we're going to go ahead and sew a stitch. So we have your foot right here. I have just like a universal needle right in here. You can already kind of see a line here, or maybe you can't see it, but there's already a straight stitch along the edge of this fabric that I've grabbed. This is just a scrap fabric from a leftover sheet that I had. So we're going to go ahead and just do a straight stitch just next to this already intact straight stitch. So I'm going to use that lever. Mine is in the back of the machine here, but sometimes they're on the side, and you'll go ahead and drop the foot down. I'm going to set mine to a straight stitch now, and I'll go ahead and turn my machine on, and then I have my hand on the back stitch area right here. So this is my back stitch. This is how I back stitch. So you want to back stitch at the front and the end of your stitch. So we'll go ahead and start, and you just want to go really slow on the pedal, back stitch, and then go forward. And right now I have a really tight stitch going on, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen it up so it goes a little bit faster. And I usually just follow the edge of my foot, or you could follow the line in the center of your foot, whatever marking you have. We're at the end now, so I'll go a little bit past and then back and then towards the end. After that, if your thread isn't coming out easily, just pull your, kind of just do another rotation, pulling your little wheel on the side towards you, and you could pull it away. And then some newer machines will have thread cutters right here on the side. Mine doesn't, so I'll go ahead and use my little scissors and cut the thread off on either side. And then you have a nice straight stitch. And this is just on the single layer of fabric, so we're not really stitching anything together for this stitch. I'll show you a seam in a second. Next, we're going to go ahead and do a zigzag. So you can go ahead and select a zigzag. For mine, I just turn the wheel to like a 2 or a 3. And I'm going to set my length to, so my width is at like a 2.5, 3, and my length is at a 3 as well. So I'll go ahead and turn my machine on again and do it again. So have my hand on my back stitch lever, go a little bit forward, back stitch, and keep going. And then the needle is going side to side, get to the end, back stitch, go off the fabric. So here my thread isn't coming out very well, so you can see how I just have to pull my needle up, and then it releases the thread. Cut it off, and you have a zigzag stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and show you these closer up, and then we will do a seam. So you can see the straight stitch right here, and the zigzag stitch right next to it. And those are your stitches. Okay, so now if we're doing a seam, I have one fabric right here. It's a really long piece of fabric. Let's go ahead and show you just for seam purposes. We're going to go ahead and cut the fabric in half. So I'm cutting the fabric in half, just a straight line. And usually when you're sewing, you want to do right side facing together. So on this fabric, there's a very obvious front side, and then there's a very obvious back side. So you're going to do front sides facing together because you want the seam to not show once you open it up. So front sides facing. Again, or I said this in my upcycled video, but I do not use pins, but if you want to use pins, let's get a cute pin thing right here, and you would just pin along the edge. The sewing machine does go over the pins, so you don't need to take out the pins before you sew over them. So you would just pin like that along the side all the way down. I don't use pins unless I'm doing like a folded seam, but I'll go ahead and show you for the video. So depending on your seam allowance, you want to go ahead and leave some space on the side I don't have a serger machine, and I don't usually leave a huge seam allowance, but again, I'm still learning myself, so just depending on like if you're following a pattern, if they tell you to leave a seam allowance, you can just, the seam allowance would be on the right side of your foot, right here. I'm going to leave like a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I'll go ahead and put my foot down. You can see just a little bit of fabric on the right side, but I'm mainly on the edge. And then we'll turn on my machine and we'll do a straight stitch. So my stitch width is at 0 because it's at straight, and then my stitch length is around 3 for a straight stitch. So I have my hand on the back lever. Go ahead and start. And you back stitch, and then you go. And I'm going to just follow that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way down. And then at the end, you back stitch and turn your wheel towards you to get your thread out. So now I can take my pins out. And when you open it up, you have a nice, clean seam. So that would be the seam. And if you pull it, it's not going anywhere. On the other side, you have the seam allowance. You could like go ahead and press this open with an iron if you want. You can go ahead and do bias binding. You could do a lot of things with this seam. You could also cut it shorter. If you don't have a fabric that frays very much, you could just cut it off, depending on what you're doing and what fabric you're working with. Again, well, I don't think I've said this, but depending on the fabric you're working with, your seams will fray more, your edges will fray more. If you have a serger machine, that's going to go ahead and lock up the edges, so you would basically serge the edges first and then seam, or you could do a zigzag stitch. So why don't I go ahead and show you how I do that without a serger machine, how I kind of polish up the edges for fabric that frays a lot. So here I'm going to show you how I polish off the edges of fabric without a serger machine. So you see I have this blanket material and it would open up and fray a lot if I didn't polish off the edges first. You can just sew a seam with a zigzag stitch with this kind of fabric and hope for the best, but if you really want to make it secure and last a long time, this is what I do. So I have my foot right here, and I'm going to, instead of leaving a seam allowance, I'm going to put my fabric basically in the middle. You see this little divot right here? I'm going to put it in the middle, so when I drop my foot down, my fabric is kind of in the middle of my foot, my presser foot. So then when I start my machine, I'm going to set my stitch to like a 3, and my stitch length to like a 2, just to get it a little bit tighter. But depending on the fabric, you don't want to do that tight of a stitch because then it will fray. It'll like bunch up weird. So I'm going to do my best to hold the camera like this while I sew. I'm not going to backstitch to show you this, but you should backstitch at the end. You can kind of see how it's just zigzagging just on the edge of my fabric. So then when I take it out, you can kind of see how that zigzag stitch is just on the edge. And that's going to go ahead and help the fraying edges of your fabric kind of stay together. And then you would just sew a seam normally with that edge. And then that, of course, would not show after you sew your seam. You can see the edge there. I just got the edge of the fabric. So we learned how to thread your bobbin, how to sew a stitch, how to sew a seam. So now we're going to just do a very simple pattern, and we're going to make this pillowcase. I'm going to be working with a stretch jersey material. It's a cotton and hemp blend that I sourced from Kindle Fabrics. They are where I source my fabrics. I can go ahead and link their website below. They're amazing. They're based in the Northwest Canada area. So I'm going to use this. You don't need a stretch fabric for this project because this fabric isn't like stretched out on the pillowcase. So you don't need a stretch fabric. If you have one, fine, but you don't need one. This fabric doesn't fray at all, so you don't need to polish off the edges. It kind of just rolls up, which is completely fine with me. So we'll go ahead and just make a very simple pillowcase pattern. And if you follow along, that's great. Let me know in the comments if you made your own pillowcase. So let's get started. Okay, so let's get started. For this project, you will need a pillow. Whatever pillow you want to pattern. You also need a ruler. You can use something like this, or you can use just a regular wooden ruler. I was trying to find mine, but I can't find it. You'll also need something to make a pattern with. I've used poster board in the past. Poster board works great, however, I never really looked up what to use for a pattern. I think you're supposed to use like medical grade paper, which I'm going to start transitioning to. However, if you're just learning how to sew, I want to make this super accessible for you. And so we're going to actually make a pattern, and this is my first time ever doing this, out of Whole Foods bags. Because we're going to repurpose, and we're going to recycle, and we're going to reuse. So first we're going to go ahead and take off the handles of our Whole Foods bags. If you watched my craft video about how to make little gift bags, then you will know what to do next. But if you haven't, then I'll teach you. On these paper bags, there's a little seam that's been glued, and you can go ahead and just rip it off. And you want to do this as carefully as possible because we're going to want to keep as much of this bag intact for our pattern as we can. And we might have to use more than one bag. So go ahead and open it up. The seam follows all the way to the bottom of the bag. Go rip it all the way down as carefully as possible, and then it filters off to the right and the left. So go ahead and rip those. That's where you're going to probably find it rips a little bit. And you just open up. Whoops, I ripped it. That's okay. You might need 2 of these bags, and then we'll just glue them together. That's what I do for poster board anyways. In another video, I will use the proper pattern making paper to show you. So we're going to rip it all the way up, open, and then you have something like this. So we will need another bag, and then we'll glue them together and cut. So I'm going to rip open another bag, and then we'll start making our pattern. Okay, so I went a little bit more rogue on this one because I figured we'll just cut off the bottom and we'll glue the bags together like that on the edge that's not ripped. I'll probably just cut off the ripped edge really quick. And then I'll use this to make more paper. If you saw my other video, there is a video on how to make your own paper using recycled paper. I also saw that on Instagram. I saw a video on Instagram, and again, I am not like a professional seamstress. I am self-taught. I didn't go to school for this, but I do use my sewing scissors for many things, and I actually saw a video on Instagram that you're not supposed to use your sewing scissors for anything else but fabric. I would recommend not doing that with your new sewing scissors, like what I'm doing, because they are dull now, so I will need to get new sewing scissors. Alright, so next we're just going to glue these together. I'm just going to use my famous hot glue gun, so I'm going to go ahead and get that set up really quick. Bags have been glued together, so now you have this big sheet of paper, and we'll go ahead and measure out our pattern. And just kind of lay it over the pillow. So this pillow is about 18 width. And again, if you don't have a stretch fabric and you're nervous that it won't fit, then you always want to just measure over. So we'll add 3 inches to make it 21 inches width. And for the length, we'll add 3 inches again. So this pillow is about 25.5 inches long. So we'll just say 26. So we'll add 3 inches and we'll say 29 inches long. So 21 by 29, and our paper that we have gives us plenty of room for that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a pencil and we'll start making our markings for our pattern. So let's go ahead and first, we're going to fold this in half and just cut a straight line on one side so we know where we can measure from. I'm going to get out my wooden ruler. So we're going to measure 12 inches in from the fold, all the way up. So 12 here, just to get a straight line. What you could do is take your ruler and just line it up along all those markings that you just made to draw a straight line. Right, so go ahead and cut our straight line. Now we have a straight line for our pattern paper. So now we can just go ahead and measure 21 inches in from that straight line and cut along one side for our pattern. So we're going to start on the bottom again, and we're going to do the same type of lines to cut all the way up. When you're first learning how to pattern make and sew, I recommend doing projects that have a good room for error margin. A pillowcase isn't going to be a huge deal if you mess up the measurements that much. But a fitted gown, it would be a big deal. So when you're first learning, just start with projects that give you a good room for error margin. So go ahead and cut along that line now. So now we have 21 inches for the width. You can lay your pillow on it to see how it would fit. And then we said 29 inches for the length. There we have it. We have our pillowcase pattern. We're going to make this really simple and just have it hang off the edge like a regular pillowcase would. See how these pillowcases are just open on one side and they're kind of hemmed. So you can kind of see. What you can also do for this pattern, which would be really easy to do, is literally just take a pillowcase you already have and lay it onto a fabric and cut out that measurement, and you would have a pillowcase. And so you don't even need a pattern for this pillowcase, but that is how you kind of create a pattern using a recycled Whole Foods bag. Now we'll take our hemp fabric, and for fabric that you're marking, I would recommend putting your fabric front side face down so you can mark the back edge of your fabric and not mark up the top of your fabric that's going to show. And depending on how much fabric you have, you could even avoid cutting out a bottom seam and just lay out a really long strip of fabric and cut out a very large rectangle. So I have enough fabric length to just not stitch a bottom seam and just lay out my fabric twice and cut a really long rectangle, and then I'll only have to do the side seams to attach it. So again, you can use the pattern we have, or you could just take a pillowcase and lay it on your fabric, and I would just cut a little bit around your pillowcase, maybe 1/4 inch around it, not exactly on it. Since we made our pattern, I'll go ahead and cut using my pattern. You can use a colored pencil or a pencil. You don't need a fabric pencil right away, but I would get one if you don't want your pencil to show, or at least just test your pencil that you're using on some fabric and then wash it to make sure it comes out first. But you could just use whatever pencil you have laying around at first if you want to trace your pattern. So you can just trace it and cut out like that, or you could take pins and pin your fabric to your pattern, like that, and just cut around it. So I'm not even going to use pins just because we're only making a pillowcase. And I'm just going to go ahead and start cutting along the edge of my pattern. Again, this does not need to be perfect. And then I'll just take my pattern and just mark a line on the top. So I could take that same pattern and flip it and just make one big long rectangle. So this is a really simple pillowcase. I'll also teach you how to hem at the end. So now we have our very long rectangle, and all we're going to do is fold it right sides facing one another. And we'll go ahead and sew a seam on the right and the left side, and I'll teach you how to hem the bottom edges, and then we'll have our pillowcase. So we're back at the sewing machine. We have our wrong side facing out, our right side's facing in. We're going to fold this pillowcase in half, so we're going to connect the bottom edges together. You can use pins, or you can just sew like me. For this project, I'm just going to sew a straight stitch at like a 3 length. So we'll begin, and then we'll back stitch, and we'll go all the way to the end, and then we will hem at the end. You can see for my fabric I'm not leaving any seam allowance, so I have the edge of my fabric lined up with the edge of my foot. And that's again because this fabric specifically that I'm using doesn't fray. So if your fabric is fraying, you want to polish off the edges like I did show you with the zigzag stitch first before you sew. And then you could leave more of a seam allowance if you wanted, but sewing on the edge even with that zigzag stitch polishing off the edge would be fine as well. And this is just a pillowcase, so we're not going to be doing too many crazy things with it. I just take moments to pause and line up my fabric as needed, and it doesn't need to be perfect, but you just want to make sure you're getting both fabrics in that seam. And then we'll leave the top edge open, so at the end we will backstitch and take our thread out and cut it off. Then do the same thing to the other side. You see I'm putting my thread behind my foot, that way it doesn't get all bunched together. This is a good time to practice like doing straight stitching, and making little projects like this, like these, just gives you the confidence to try more and complicated things. Just knowing that you could get a straight stitch that's not all curvy, and just gives you an opportunity to practice. Also just learning about your machine and what kind of stitch length you like. This is a good way to test fabrics as well, to see what stitch length and width works best for your type of fabric. I could even do like a longer stitch length for my straight stitch because the jersey does bunch a little bit when it's too tight. Great. So there you have your pillowcase. We will turn it inside out. So you're just going to turn it inside out, and you have a beautiful seam on either side. And you have your pillowcase. So now we can kind of see how much we want to hem off of the edges. So you see how there's like that extra 3 inches just hanging off. So we could probably just hem like an inch on either side, or like an inch and a half, and make it look really nice on the edges. And then, I mean, you don't even have to do this with this type of fabric because it won't fray or anything, but if you want to just hem it together on the edges, that way it just looks nice. And there you go. So I'll teach you how to hem, which is very simple. and then we will have our final product, and we'll go ahead and show you at the end. Okay, when you hem, you want your fabric to be not inside out, so having it right side out. You're gonna fold, so this is where you could like iron your seams open. You do kind of want your seam open to be hemmed, so then you can just take it from your seam on the inside and fold it in. And we said like an inch. This is like an inch, it's like an inch and a quarter. So we'll just do that because that's where it naturally folded. And for a hem, you want to line up your foot with the inside edge of your fabric, so there's not like a lot of loose edge that hangs over. So instead of lining up your foot on the side edge, on the right edge, you want to line it up on the left edge of your fabric. And then you just go ahead and sew all the way around. For jersey fabric, while you're sewing, you don't want to stretch it out while you're sewing. So you want to just let the jersey just sit neutral and kind of just guide it with your hand, but you're never like pulling the fabric unless that's intentional. And I could show you, I'm going to do a dress pattern one day, and I'll show you how to do that. But for these purposes, don't stretch your jersey, just let it sit natural while you sew. So again, the foot is lined up on the left edge of your fabric, and you could do a zigzag or a straight stitch for this. I'll do a straight stitch. And then again, you can like pin all this down, and you can even iron that hem to make it really nice and creased. For these purposes, I am not doing any of that. For a dress, I would probably iron it, but for a pillowcase, I don't really care enough to get out my iron. And you backstitch at the end, cut off your thread, and there you have a nice hemmed edge. Again, see, it's not perfect because I didn't iron or anything, but it's good for our purposes of showing you how to hem a fabric. So that is your hem, and we'll show you the final pillowcase. Here is our final pillowcase. Very simple. You could also make this way more complicated and intricate if you wanted it better, and you could play around with this pattern. It's very simple. You could make it more of a diagonal rectangle to make it tighter. You can use elastic thread to cinch it at the end. I have another pillowcase pattern that I did that I could show you another time, but this pattern will just give you the confidence to play around with your sewing machine. Again, it's great to practice just like your edges and just your seams and cutting out and just getting confidence creating a pattern. Cutting into fabric, it can be intimidating, so this just gives you that confidence and that experience doing those things. And you have a nice pillowcase from it. Again, I source this from Kindle Fabrics, but usually I thrift a lot of my fabric, and you can thrift cotton sheets or silk sheets or linen sheets at your local thrift store. In another video, I'm going to take you on a thrift journey with me and show you how I thrift fabric from the thrift store, because that is where I get the majority of my fabric that I use. However, this one is sourced from Kindle Fabrics, so I'll link them below, or I'll include their website below in the description. Let me know in the comments if you made a pillowcase, and I will see you soon. Thanks for watching.